Hello, everybody. Now we're in the panel portion of the evening. So as I said, I want to say thank you, and maybe we'll start by each of you just introducing yourselves, and actually, if you don't mind, sharing your ages, because one of the things that feels important about this conversation is that actually we're all a product not just of our own families, but of the time that we grew up in as well, and then the times that have changed over the course of our lifetime. So how about I start actually with the first question, and you can introduce yourself by sort of starting to answer that, which is that I asked you all to prepare what is the story of Israel that you grew up with, and perhaps sharing one or two highlights or moments that depict what that story is for you. So Marsha, why don't we start with you, actually?
Okay, so now you know, in 2 weeks I'll be 79. So my story, actually this is the easiest question we got, right? Thank you for starting there. Thank you for starting there. I was born before Israel, so I'm a year older than the state of Israel. I don't remember those first years when Israel was born. I do remember probably 2, 3, 4 years later, however, when I was in Hebrew school. At that time, I was a kid, and my parents belonged to an Orthodox shul in Brooklyn, in Manhattan Beach. So, of course, I was going to Hebrew school 3 times a week, and we were celebrating all the holidays. And I have this vague memory, and I don't know it's from TV but this is how we celebrated. We were always wearing white and either blue shorts or blue skirts, right? And we all had little Israeli flags. And we learned how to sing Hatikva, which had been recently penned, right? And we read stories mostly about the Chalutzim, right, the pioneers. The story was that they were strong, and they worked, and they labored in the fields to, make the desert bloom, just to drain the swamps and make the desert bloom. Last night, in the middle of the night, I remembered a song that I think we sang as a round, and it goes like this. Zum gali gali gali, zum gali gali, zum gali gali gali, zum gali gali. Ech lutz leman avodah, avodah leman ech lutz gali gali. Man avodah, avodah leman ech.
Very good.
We did that in rounds endlessly, and until we were silly, Additionally, as American Jews, what were we doing? We were raising money. It was the time when you had those little blue and white boxes from J&F, and we were collecting money, and we were planting trees, and we were thinking about being part of the process of building the country. That was how we participated. Additionally, Israeli bonds, remember those? I mean, they still exist, but I don't know how many people are buying them. In those days, that was really at the center of our lives, whether it was for a bat mitzvah, for a new birth, for any celebration, families were buying Israeli bonds. What else? I think I'm not going to leave it at that, because that's the very earliest years of, right? The next, if I go forward from my 47 or 48 to 67, that was the Six-Day War. And that was a miraculous moment in our lives, and I do remember that. I remember the excitement in the streets, on the news, that this tiny little nation had beat back its enemies on 3 sides in 6 days. How the hell did they do that? That was something we experienced with great pride. And we were glued to the TV, actually, at that time. And, I have this image of Moshe Dayan, whom everybody became a hero, not just for the Jews, but he was on the cover of Time magazine. Imagine a Jew, an Israeli military tactician becoming the subject of world news and national news. Okay, you can stop.
Perfect, thank you.
So the word story about Israel doesn't really belong to me because I grew up there. So it wasn't a story. It wasn't something I heard about. It was something I lived. So I'm 67 years old. I was 3 months shy of my 10th birthday during the Six-Day War, but I'll get to that in a minute. So my parents came to Israel from Europe. My mom grew up in Hungary. She was a Holocaust survivor. She was sent to Auschwitz along with many Hungarian Jews, and then spent a year in forced labor camp in Germany. Came back to the town where she grew up in. She was 15 years old, finished high school there, and came to Israel when she was 19 in 1949. My father was already in Israel by then. He left Europe. He grew up in Romania, but also from Hungarian Jewish family. Came to Israel during the war in 1944. And they met and they had me. I remember the Six-Day War very well. We lived in a town called Bat-Chava. There were no bomb shelter in the building that I grew up in, so I was 9 years old and I dug trenches so that if we were outside and it was going to bomb, that's what we did. And it seemed kind of normal. And now I'm talking to friends of mine who are friends and family who are in Israel when there are other wars and how they're going through those wars. And it's heartbreaking that we still, years later, still have wars where children have to sleep in a rainforest room and they can't. Did you know that kids in Israel didn't go to school for 6 weeks? Nobody went to school for 6 weeks. You couldn't go out to shop. You couldn't go to work because Iran was bombing. I'm not talking about who is at fault, but normal people, regular people, my friends, my family, they couldn't go to work. The kids couldn't go to school. So we're still going through that. So I'll stop here.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I'm 31, and I'm American. So I grew up in Florida. I went to a Jewish day school from kindergarten through 8th grade. And so I had, I think similar to Marsha, actually a very similar upbringing about the story of Israel. I think we were told the traditional land without a people for a people without a land. We sung Zoom Gali Gali probably every day. And we were told the story of settlers coming in the early 19th century, whether it was during fleeing pogroms or anti-Semitism or the Holocaust, and settling a land and bringing innovation and turning the desert into a wonderful forest. And I remember my biggest memories every year on Yom HaAtzmaut, we would have, because it was a field day for us, and they put this huge map out. It was I was 10, and older, but it felt like it was 30 feet big. It was probably 10 feet. And it had the map of Israel, and it had cartoonish, landmarks that would show this is Tel Aviv where technology is, and this is the Negev, and it would show trees popping up and agriculture, and then it would show Haifa, and it would show beauty and art and Tzfat, and it was this is the story I was told, and wasn't told anything else. I was too young to really understand the world around me, and of course we heard, I think Gilad Shalit was taken hostage when I was there as well, so that was probably the biggest story and like news that I got from it. But I also knew that I learned as I got older that story wasn't complete. But I can say that for a different question. But yeah, I feel like my early years as a child was definitely formed around very similar to Marsha, which is I think interesting in this intergenerational space that we had a very similar story.
Yeah, great. That's so actually, Matt, why don't we pick up with you and we'll go maybe back. But similar to that same question, there's sort of the story you grew up with, and then there is how you came into consciousness, and for Yael it will obviously be different because, as she said, she was living there. But did that story, were there moments where that story changed for you over time? And do you want to just highlight one or two moments from that as well?
Yeah, I had, going to a Jewish day school, I had the amazing privilege of multiple opportunities to go to Israel, got my bar mitzvah there with my family and a bunch of other students, and then went on a few exchange programs in high school as well. So I think I've been there 6 times at this point, including being there for a full summer as well. And that time when I was there as a teenager in the summers, 2011, 2012, and my history isn't the best, but there was the Fayyad plan. Obama gave his UN speech that was like, we need a Palestinian state. And the UN was also looking at declaring a Palestinian statehood or voting on it. And this was like, I started learning about this, it was like, 14 years old probably, 14, 15. And I was like, oh, this sounds good, because I heard, there was like the second Intifada and there was bombings, and I heard about fear from my first time there, and I heard about skirmishes and different smaller wars popping up, and I was like, okay, so this sounds like there's peace. And I remember one time we were sitting outside with the exchange program. It was 30 Americans, 30 Israelis, and one of the adults brought up this potential that, okay, by the end of the year, we might have a Palestinian state alongside a Jewish state. And I was waiting to hear probably broad enthusiasm, peace. We're going, a lot, remember, we're 16 years old. They're going to go to the IDF within the next 2 years. And so I was expecting broad enthusiasm, and it turned into very mixed. There were some people who were enthusiastic and hopeful. There were also, probably the same amount of people who were very afraid. They thought this would lead to more violence, and others had underpinnings of hatred in their voice about Palestinians and Arabs, which I found shocking. I was like, what are you talking about? We just went to an Arab village. We met Bedouins. These are good people. What are you talking about? How they're not all bad people. Just they think you're all bad people, but we know you're not. So what? Something in my brain wasn't working. And sorry, I took notes so I don't forget anything. But yeah, I think that brought up nuance for the first time in my life. That I was like, wait, the story that I was told, there's so much more to it. It isn't it started in the early 1900s and ended in 1967. There was so much more that happened, and so much more that is still happening. And I think that encouraged me to kind of take my own path of knowledge. And I was going to college in a few years, and I joined J Street and got involved in a lot of areas around that as well, trying to educate myself and realizing that maybe the Jewish day school didn't give me the full education on this amazing story when we got a full education on other things like the American Civil Rights Movement. So yeah.
Excellent, thank you so much. Yael, can we go to you?
Sure. So growing up in Israel, I imbibed the ideology of, the same things that you're talking about, except, of course, I grew up there. And I want to also mention that I came from a pretty socialist family. My father was in the labor movement, in the Labor Party, which almost doesn't exist anymore. And we were very secular. In Israel, there is a bifurcation where most people who are more right-wing tend to be more religious, and people who are more left-wing tend to be more secular. That's how I grew up. That was the understanding. And so when Israel conquered the West Bank and the Golan Heights in 1967, in my family, we called it the occupied territories. We didn't call it Judea and Samaria. For us, it was an occupation. And yet, I don't think I had a very strong consciousness of the Palestinian plight. And I remember in my, around age 19 or so, I had a friend who was very left-wing, very pro-Palestinian, and I thought that she was too extreme. So I was, I think, very mainstream. Living here, I've realized more and more how Israel's occupation of the West Bank and Gaza really not only is it bad for the Palestinians, it's bad for the Israelis. It's bad for their morality, it's bad for their security, and I want to also mention, you mentioned earlier, Rabbi Werber, that here in the United States, we can love this country and don't like the government of the country, especially now, right? And it's the same thing in Israel. There is a government that, yes, a lot of people follow, but there are also a lot of resistance. And the people that I'm in touch with in Israel, my friends and my family, are very much in opposition to the government, very much in opposition to the violence against Palestinians in the West Bank, and the continuation of building more and more settlements that would make it really hard to ever have a Palestinian state within Israel. And I actually don't see a solution right now to the problem of, Israel and Palestine, but I've become more aware of the Palestinian plight. And yet, it's my country. I grew up there. I have friends there. I have family there, and it's very dear to my heart. And so I just want to mention again, there is resistance within Israel. So the solution is not always to just, I don't want to hear about Israel. It's a terrible country. The government is doing terrible things. But maybe we can support the opposition there against the government to try to bring it to be a better place for everybody to live.
Amen. Thank you so much, Yael.
Amen. So the question that we got, how has your connection to the people, the land, the government changed over time? Wow. That's a big one. So that's a tough question. The first one was a gimme. Of course, for me, it spans a much longer segment of my life. And I have visited Israel many, many times, in part because I wanted to, but also because my brother married an Israeli in this country. And when his marriage broke up and they were living here, my niece and my sister-in-law moved back to Israel to be with their family. So I was back and forth, often with my mom, and that was really important to us. And we traveled with our family there and visited lots of things. But I'm going to move forward. With the land, it's also, there's no one experience, but I'm going to tell you about two. One kind of quickly, just to keep this short, but I was in my 20s and I was traveling with friends. It was after college. And of course, we wanted to see a lot of things and go to a kibbutz and spend some time there. And as it turned out, this one friend of ours had been born at this kibbutz and knew it well. So we went to the Emek Jezreel, which is the Jezreel Valley, and stayed at the kibbutz. I don't remember the name, but it was a very, very successful kibbutz. And we were curious. And so when we arrived, they gave us a tour. And they took us around, and they took us to this giant manufacturing facility. And when we walked in, what did I see? Lo and behold, they were making pork sausages. I nearly,
That's the modern promise of the state of Israel, I think. Yeah.
This kibbutz was near Afula, and there were many Arab villages around. And this was the early 70s, and they were living side by side in peace, right? And helping each other live their lives. Now, the question was gnawing at me, and I thought, well, what am I really going to tell you about? And again, in the middle of the night, in the early Intifada, Susan and I were visiting Israel. So it was like 1990, I think. And we were in Jerusalem, and we wanted to visit Masada. I wanted to show her Masada, because I had been there. But we went, we took the Eged bus, that marvelous bus, getting up at dawn and going and coming back. On the way back, the bus driver was taking people back to their hotels, one by one, dropping them off. At one point, there was a very narrow road, and the driver was trying to make a turn, but he couldn't make this sharp U-turn, right, because there was a car blocking the way. So he was honking his horn, and no one showed up. He got out of the bus, and he started looking for people. Meanwhile, we were on the bus with just a few other people, and all of a sudden, the street got quiet. The whole street. It's a tiny, narrow street. Everybody disappeared. The bus driver disappeared. And what we saw were kids running down the street with rocks in their hands, and they were throwing rocks at the bus. And the people behind us were saying, duck, duck, get down, close your windows, close the door. And we did that. We were hysterical. We were really nervous. And we stayed like that for about 10 minutes. And then the driver came back, opened the door, got on the bus. We peeked out. The car was gone, and he took off. And we really never knew much about his involvement, but we sort of speculated, was he in any way involved? And, we didn't know that. We went back to our hotel, and of course we fell at the concierge, or the hotelier, and we said, where can we get a drink, number one? and then wait till you hear what we just went through. And we told him, and he looked at us with disdain, and basically said, so, where do you think you are? This is Israel. This is how we live. Okay, that was the end of that, and we left. We met one type of Israeli. I'm going to tell you another thing, which was that night, oddly enough, we were having dinner with Amos Ilan, who was a friend of Susan's brother, Carl. They both worked at the Washington Post and at the New York Times, and they were very, very dear friends. So Amos, as some of you must know, was a prominent Israeli journalist and writer and thinker and highly regarded. He wrote a biography of Herzl, which if you're interested in Zionism, I really recommend. He wrote a book on the Israeli founders and sons. Anyway, we had dinner with Amos, and Amos, we had heard, was kind of depressed because he saw the rise of Arab nationalism, and he saw hold on a second, where are my notes? We knew that he was really depressed and not in a very good place. And he was pretty disillusioned, actually. That's what I wanted to say about prospects for peace. So that was the end of our dinner. He was married to an American, by the way, and he ended up moving to Tuscany, where he had a house, where he was doing most of his writing. And the one thing that we learned from him that he considered was his key indispensable insight was that the non-Jews cared about Israel as much as the Jews. Seems obvious, right? But that was it. The Palestinians, the non-Jews, care about that land as much as the Jews. And I think he didn't think there was a way forward at that point. So it was, tough to hear.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I want to just say such a huge moment of gratitude for the three of you for being open and able to share with all of us, and you truly all shared so beautifully. We are basically at time, so if there's any one last thing, I always want to end on a note of some nechemta. So if there's an ability to say, like, what is giving you a little bit of hope or a little bit of nechemta, comfort in this moment after hearing some of those stories, I'd love to hear it, but just keep it quite short if you can, and anybody's welcome to jump in.
Well, I can just say quickly, visiting and learning about the Yad B'Yad schools, the hand-in-hand schools, where children and parents are Arabic and Jewish are studying together and learning. That's an extraordinary thing, and it's starting with children. And of course, that organization that has been nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize, which is the Parents Circle and whatever their name is. It's a mouthful.
Bereaved Families Forum.
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of the flip side of the Yad B'Yad. Those give me hope.
Thank you, Marsha.
Similarly, the organizations where the Israelis and Palestinians work together. So, for example, Combatants for Peace, Women in Black, all of these organizations that resist the government and work together to try to find peace.
I feel like I'm going to say very similar things right now. One of my biggest ones is Standing Together. So Lonely Green, Sally Abed, and Rula Daoud, when they come and speak here, they're amazing. I've gotten to know a few of them personally. And then locally, there's Tamar Glazerman and Tamara Geyer, who are both Israeli. Tamar Glazerman actually lost her aunt during the October 7th, and she really shows me there's hope that you can put away your hatred and find dialogue. And I think she's just a truly amazing human being. And then also a book is coming out, or is out, with Aziz Abu Sara and Maozi Non, and I love hearing them speak. I'm going to read their book as soon as I can get it from the library.
Amazing. Can we just get a huge round of applause for this, please? Thank you all so much. That was incredible.